going to look at the next 5 to 10 years of computing. And I'm not going to get down in the weeds with the next generation of chip and this sort of thing, because there's some really dramatic, you could argue once-in-a-lifetime changes that are going to hit us in this next 10 years, and that's what I'm going to try to focus on. We talk a lot about big data. This is a log graph of the data being moved over the Department of Energy's network over the last 25 years. It's a 1 million-fold increase in the data that's being carried over that network. And as we know, in 2012, this idea got to the White House and to the major funding agencies, science and engineering agencies, and that they're going to spend $200 million on big data. Now, a lot of what they're spending it on is a brand new infrastructure separate from the shared internet that you're all familiar with that might have 10 to 100 megabit a second throughput, and instead building something 1,000 times that capability. In fact, it's already been built. Actually, during the coming out of the collapse of Western civilization, one of the projects that was funded was to put 100,000 megabit per second optical network across the country. The Department of Energy did. You can now go to Internet 2, and you can get essentially a dedicated pipe just for you that can move gigabytes to terabytes of data. Now, the part that's really new is the part that was missing was not the wide area. It actually was the enterprise, in our case, the campuses. And NSF, probably unknown to most of you, has awarded over the last 2 or 3 years 130 grants to over 100 campuses to build what you see here, which is an optical network on top of the 30,000 users who are using the shared internet on UC San Diego's campus, that are home-run optical connects going through a switch that Andy Beckelsheim created with Arista that is connecting our all the data generators, the genome sequencers, mass spectrometers, microscopes, with all the data consumers, storage, compute, et cetera, and then that's all interconnected at 100 gigabits a second into the California Scenic Network and the National Internet 2 network. And if you go down and look at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, we're connected at 120 gigabits a second to that huge big data. This is what a big data compute storage environment looks like. You'll notice that there's 6,000 terabytes of rotating storage and data oasis connected to one of Andy's Aristas at 128 parallel 10 gigabit optical paths. That's 1.3 terabits per second. Remember, you're measuring things on the internet in megabits. That's 1 million times what it is. Now you say, well, who needs that? IBM's already won a contract for delivering what's called an exascale computer. That's 1,000 times the current petascale computers, for a 1 million antenna telescope that will be divided between Australia and South Africa. The engineering specs, if you look them up for this, is you've got to be able to move terabyte images worldwide every minute. Now, who's the last time you put an attachment that was more than 10 megs on your email and it got through, right? So there's a huge change coming in a separate big data infrastructure and the computing that goes with it. Now, I personally lived through the last billion-fold increase in supercomputing, from the megaflops, the CDC 6600 I did my PhD work on back in the 70s, the gigaflops, I had one of the first Cray 2s, teraflops as we went to highly parallel, and now NCSA, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications that I founded, has the one academic Blue Waters multi-petaflop machine. So those are 1,000-fold each time we make those jumps. And the next transition that has been being worked on now for 5 to 10 years is the exaflop, or the exascale. But the difference in the movie, having seen this movie, you know, you think, well, okay, here we go again. This time it's going to be very different, I think. And that's because finally, on this exponential, we're crossing through a pre-existing threshold, which is the speed of your brain. Now, to show you what that means, first of all, you think the United States is the lead. China currently owns the the title of the fastest supercomputer in the world. And notice at 54.9 petaflops, it's only a factor of 20 more to get to the exascale. What happens at the exascale? Well, a couple of years ago, here's from Scientific American, IBM was able to build a completely new kind of simulation where you're looking at neurons and their synaptic connections, and to use the largest blue gene supercomputer to do that calculation. You see that first red arrow to the right is the point that that happened. And then you see a few years later the Chinese computer coming. By the end of this decade, when we get the exascale online, you're going to go from doing a 5% of the brain 100 times slower than real time to 100% of the brain in real time. So whether or not that means it's faster than a human brain or not, I don't really want to get into, but the point is you only cross this threshold once, where you can actually simulate the complexity of a human brain on a supercomputer. And that's, I think, going to change everything. This is happening, of course, at the time that we heard from the very nice nanoelectronics panel this morning, that as the line widths get down into the 1 to 10 nanometer region, quantum mechanics, instead of becoming a pesky problem we have to engineer around at the 10 or 20 or 30% effects, it becomes the dominant. We are going to learn to live in the quantum world. And what that's leading to is a whole new set of architectures. We're going to have two people on our panel talking about quantum computing. We heard this morning about the changes coming in nanoelectronics. We're going to hear about approximate computing, which is going to become more and more what we have to live with. And then neuromorphic computing, which is brain-inspired processors. Now, I know this sounds a little science fiction-y, except that the DARPA, the Defense Department agency, has already spent $100 million on this project to create brain-inspired computers. And look at the companies they're putting it into. IBM and HRL, which is formerly the Hughes Research Lab, a huge long-term defense lab, owned by General Motors and Boeing. This is not some pipe dream. This is General Motors, Boeing, and IBM that are working with DARPA, the most advanced agency we got in the federal governments, to drive this home. And you're beginning to see the New York Times and other Wired and so forth, MIT Tech Review, this whole thing about how do we learn to think in a non-von Neumann fashion. And we just had the cover of Science a few months ago with IBM's True North processor, 5.3 billion transistors, the largest integrated transistor IBM's ever made, or I guess anyone. And that is, has on that chip 1 million neurons and 256 million synapses. So this is not your von Neumann computer architecture. This is very different, and it's not going to replace those architectures. It is going to provide us for the first time with pattern recognition computers that are going to be, I think, revolutionary in terms of vision, voice, autonomous robots, and so forth. And as many as incredible as this chip is, they're now going to build 4,000 of these chips into a supercomputer based on non-von Neumann in just the next year or two. So, and this is IBM. This is, again, not crazy people. So I think this is a big change. Amazingly, what's going to happen at the same time, you heard that President Obama a year or so ago announced the BRAIN Initiative. That's actually a nanotechnology initiative to drive new forms of nanotechnology that can reverse engineer and read out in real time the activity of the brain. So as we learn more about how the brain actually works, that is going to feed into this new world of neuromorphic computers. And by the way, it's not just IBM. There's a whole bunch of startups, other kinds of companies that are in this game as well, and there's just an explosion of new ideas. And so where that's leading us to